And last but not least today, we will hear from Allison Ross, and she will be informing us about medicinal cannibalism from the 17th to the 18th century in Britain. So take it away, Allison.
Hello, as you guys have heard, my name is Allison Ross. My research project was medicinal cannibalism in England from the 17th to the 18th century, comparing that to medicinal cannibalism in the 21st century. My on-site research advisor was Miss Ontal, and my external advisor was Dr. Heather Ross. So I want to begin by explaining what my question was, and it was really, how has medicinal cannibalism changed since the 17th century in Britain? I really wanted to understand the differences in medicinal cannibalism during the 17th century in England versus Western medicine in the 21st century. In order to do so, I had to first understand the practice of medicine during the 17th century in England. So I used a variety of secondary sources, including Robert Merton's Science, Technology, and Society in 17th century England, and Deborah Harkness's The Jewel House, which described how science and medicine were practiced in the 17th century. In order to locate the methods in which corpse medicine was utilized to treat disease, I began searching for primary sources. I was able to find PDFs of personal journals and diaries via the Wellcome Trust online library archive, which enabled me to identify the necessary information on medicinal cannibalism. Afterwards, I researched the medical treatments of the 21st century, comparing treatments of disease that utilized corpse medicine in the 17th century to the 21st century treatment, as well as locating 21st century treatments that utilized corpse medicine. Before going into detail on medicinal cannibalism, I would like to review some key characteristics and definitions of cannibalism in general. There are two broad types of cannibalism: endocannibalism and exocannibalism. Endocannibalism is defined to be the cannibalism of members of one's tribe or family. Throughout this research, I am defining cannibalism to be the use or consumption of any human body matter. One example of endocannibalism is the Wari of Brazil, a tribe that practiced cannibalism as part of a complex mourning process where non-family members would consume the entirety of the body as a means to allow the deceased spirit to move on from that location. Another example of endocannibalism is the Fore tribe of Papua New Guinea. The Fore are the more widely recognized practitioners of cannibalism because their cannibalistic practices have been associated with the spread of kuru via prions, a disease that causes rapid deterioration in vocal and muscle skills, ultimately resulting in death. Though the primary consumers of the flesh were the Fore women, elderly, and children, other people could consume the flesh of the deceased, as the Fore tribe would, in some cases, designate specific parts of their flesh for consumption prior to their death. In both of these tribes, endocannibalism was a method of coping with grief while maintaining a connection to the deceased. Exocannibalism, however, is defined as the cannibalism of persons from outside one's tribe or family. This form is often a more recognized form of cannibalism within Western culture. One example is the Maori of New Zealand, a tribe that consumed human flesh on special occasions as well as on war campaigns. The consumption of human flesh is theorized to be the reason behind the increased average height in the Maori people because, compared to the rest of the Pacific Islands, there is no substantial place where protein can be found in this region. There is similarly an absence of naturally occurring proteins within the Americas, which may have led the Aztec civilization to the practice of exocannibalism. After their ritual of human sacrifice, the Aztecs would consume the flesh of their enemies after they had been thrown from the pyramids, cooking the bodies. It has been theorized that the consumption of human flesh was meant to subsidize the diet of the people due to the lack of substantial meat within the region. Prior to the introduction of European animals, there were few domesticated species within the area, one of the few being the llamas of Peru, a species that performed little to no hard labor and were rarely consumed. This means that the continent did not have the ready supply of meat that was available to the Europeans, such as chicken, beef, or pork, implying that they found protein from other sources, notably other humans. Medicinal cannibalism is an overlap of both endocannibalism and exocannibalism. Depending on the culture being examined, either form may be practiced for healing purposes. In China, the ritual of Keku entails the endocannibalistic practice of one feeding their own flesh to their parent in the form of soup. However, in Europe, there's a much more separated attitude taken towards the consumption of flesh, demonstrating a form of exocannibalism. During the 17th century, the flesh was typically referred to as mummy, since the initial practice of medicinal cannibalism in Europe was derived from the consumption of Egyptian mummy, spreading into the more recently deceased as the supply from Egypt decreased. Prior to this, however, cannibalism was practiced in ancient Rome, as people with epilepsy would drink the blood of fallen gladiators as a means to cure their disease. Additionally, during the 15th century, Pope Innocent VIII drank the blood of 3 young men in an effort to prevent his death. This was a common cure, along with breast milk, for old age, allowing the elderly a few more months to live. Within Europe and England as well, medicinal cannibalism peaked during the 17th century, beginning to die out towards the end and after the 18th century. Because of this, I have chosen to focus on the 17th century in England in order to better understand the various methods in which cannibalism was practiced in England just prior to and during its decline. Medicine during the 17th century was considered more of a subsection of science. It was something to be dabbled in primarily, though more people were beginning to make a career out of it. One of the primary components of medicine was anatomy, particularly dissections. Many executed corpses were designated for anatomies, as that was the method for discovery during that time period, including one of the more notable examples, Harvey Williams' discovery on the circulation of blood. Similar to the rest of science, there was no designated publication method. Discoveries were shared either by treatises or word of mouth. The modern-day journals did not exist during that time period, so cures varied from one instance to another. Most reported cures can be found in personal journals, recipe books, or other such records kept by either families or medical professionals. There was no regulation for who could and could not practice medicine. There was less controversy away from the densely populated cities, so midwives and even individual households could provide their own remedies. Within the cities, there was much more controversy as groups fought over patients and who was allowed to treat them and how. There was a certain distinction between surgeons and physicians. Surgeons could only provide topical care, no ingested remedies, and surgery. Physicians could prescribe ingested remedies. This distinction remains largely intact to this day. Conflict also existed among surgeons, as there were 2 types of surgeons: professionally trained surgeons dealing in internal injuries such as intestine sutures or tumor removal, and barber surgeons who dealt with superficial wounds and had no formal education. This led to conflict between practitioners in some instances. No one wanted to be associated with the other group, and they all wished to spread their practice outside of their established microfield, particularly with the introduction of Paracelsian medicine, a form that most resembles modern medicine due to its use of chemicals. When practiced medicine typically occurred within the patient's own home due to the small presence of formal hospitals during that time period. Those hospitals were primarily established to provide care for the elderly, crippled, and indigent, though during the 17th century, they also started to become a training ground for physicians and other healthcare providers. The majority of care for the average individual happened outside of the hospital, however, and because of this, most patients were typically responsible for their own care, as seen by the personal remedies that could be found. Remedies were varied and dependent upon who was prescribing them and when. During the 17th century, herbal remedies were the most common, as they were relatively easy to procure. Materials frequently referred to some mythological creature or were connected to a deity, implying a mystical healing quality, such as dragon's blood, which was the resin from a variety of plants, including the Dracaena species, or burgundy pitch from the Norway spruce, with a relationship to both Jupiter and Saturn as well as the Earth. The purpose of all remedies, herbal and cannibal, was to restore the vitality of the ill, either by replacing it with the spirit of a higher power or utilizing the vitality from some other individual. Some remedies utilized human material instead of human, a method just as effective, though noticeably cheaper, due to the rising costs of the declining mummy supply. By incorporating a material that possesses some additional strength, whether it be physical or metaphorical, the remedy gains potency and increases in effectiveness, particularly when the material is some form of human material. Some of the more popular varieties of mummy included the young and recently deceased. Their lives have been interrupted, therefore they contained the most spirit or life. In Carol Travis Hennicoff's book, Dinner with a Cannibal, she describes the favorite qualities of English mummy, particularly the presence of an erection in the corpse. This symbol of male virility is thought to affect the ill and heal them. A similar thought was seen in ancient Rome, where people with epilepsy would consume the blood of a fallen gladiator in the hopes of curing their disease. In 17th century England, the diseases that medicinal cannibalism addressed varied from headaches to disease to injury. A salve for wounds caused by weapons called for the moss from a skull, a popular ingredient during the time period, incorporated with other ingredients and laid on the wound. Many skulls utilized in medicine within England originated from Ireland due to the fact that in order for the moss to grow, the skull had to be unburied, and due to an uprising in the country during the 16th century, there were many unburied skulls. Both the bone and the moss on the skull were popular for a variety of cures, including epilepsy, otherwise known as the falling sickness. One cure required the skull of the opposite gender for the patient. This skull would be powdered and then consumed in small parts. Both wounds and epilepsy are now treated with pills in modern medicine, anti-inflammatories for wounds, along with potential surgery and stitches, and anticonvulsants for epilepsy. Human urine also played a prominent role in medicine during the 17th century. It was an ingredient for various salves, including those targeted towards burns and yellow jaundice. In most instances, the urine would be consumed, though the quantity varied due to the individual's production of said material. This recipe for yellow jaundice specifically calls for the party's own urine, all they make in the morning fasting. The specific amount of material used, in this case urine, is seen throughout medicine in the 17th century, both herbal and cannibal remedies. It is a practice that has continued into the 21st century with prescription medication. In modern medicine, these illnesses, wounds, epilepsy, and jaundice are rarely treated with human material. Most of these cases utilize pills or simply rest for treatment. However, there are still instances where human material is utilized in modern treatments, including blood transfusions for anemia, and organ transplant. In some cases, a single organ within an individual may affect the performance of the entire system, and in those cases, organ transplants can be life-saving. One such instance is cystic fibrosis, a genetic disease that causes buildup of thick mucus within both the lungs and the pancreas. While there are non-invasive treatments that loosen the mucus, lung transplants are one method to extend patient life. The donor lungs are not susceptible to cystic fibrosis and therefore will not be affected by mucus buildup. Other instances for utilizing human material can be for reconstruction. For an anterior cruciate ligament repair, one option is utilizing an allograft, a portion of ligament obtained from a donor, typically a cadaver. While there is a risk of rejection, this method reduces surgery time as compared to an autograft, graft obtained from either the patient's own patellar tendon or hamstring. Autografts have also been known to weaken the knee and increase the risk of arthritis in the future. There has also been a noted rise in placenta consumption, a more concrete form of medicinal cannibalism. Sources say that individuals who consume the placenta are less likely to suffer from postpartum depression and have increased energy and a better mood than if they do not consume the placenta. There have been a variety of documented means for consuming this organ, from roasting to drying and consuming via pills. However, there have not been enough studies to provide definitive results to this theory, and the conditions in which these instances are presented are not all homogeneous. What I learned is that the change in medicine from the 17th to the 21st century is seen in the instances where human material is utilized to treat disease. As scientists gained a greater understanding of the human body and how it functioned, they also identified new methods for treatment of disease, most notably in the form of chemicals. Diseases that required human material for treatment in the 17th century now rely upon chemicals, such as epilepsy. The 21st century is no less reliant upon human material, however. The nature and understanding of the diseases requiring human material for treatment are more advanced due to the general advancements in science. Modern medicine possesses the ability to perform organ transplants in a multitude of reconstructions, including facial and ligament. This demonstrates that corpse medicine is no less prevalent in the 21st century than it had been throughout the 17th century. The only difference is what diseases are being treated and how those treatments are being performed. Additionally, the protocols for utilizing corpse medicine are different in the 21st century than they had been in the 17th century. When human material is used now, protocols often call for the material to be washed or irradiated several times in order to reduce the risk of organ rejection. This process can be seen as killing the spirit or life of the individual to whom the organ previously belonged. Instead of using the human material to incorporate the spiritual vitality of the individual from whom it originated, medicine calls for only the physical material to be used. This demonstrates an increase in the separation of individual body and medicine within medicinal cannibalism in the 21st century from what had previously existed during the 17th century. My future goal is to expand this research further. I would like to examine the role of medicinal cannibalism within literature in the 21st century, as there are a few novels that reference the practice, including Amy Tan's The Bone Setter's Daughter and The Joy Luck Club. Additionally, I would like to expand the field of my research so that it includes a greater number of primary sources, allowing for a better range in analysis. My overall experience during this research was that there is no black and white within history. Western culture shows that we are judgmental of beliefs that differ from our own, though we may have shared some aspects of cultural practices at one point in time. Even though we look down upon certain practices, such as utilization of human material, we are just as guilty when it comes to that practice. I learned that in order to study history, one must discard previous thoughts regarding a topic in order to understand it fully. I would like to thank all of the individuals who helped me throughout my research, particularly my advisors, Dr. Ross and Ms. Ontal, for their support from beginning to end. Also, thank you to Ms. Poitosh and Mrs. Q for all your advice and the tremendous amount of work you both contributed in order to help us all through this process. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Yes. Is there any, have you looked into any possible harm to consuming cannibalism?
There is always a risk of transmitting diseases. During the 17th century, there is actually noted use of younger people when consuming them as a medicinal form. And this is seen because they have more spirit and life than an elderly person, since their life has been cut off before its prime. This, while it is all theoretical belief and opinion, this is actually very beneficial, since there are fewer diseases typically in a younger individual than in an elderly person. In modern medicine, we don't really consume people anymore. However, one of the reasons behind the current protocols in utilizing human material is to prevent transmission of disease, and this is seen through the fact that organs are always washed and irradiated before they're used when utilizing them in organ transplants.
Have you heard of Jacob's Creutzfeldt disease? It's transmitted through the brain tissues by the aborigines.
No, I have not, though that does sound very similar to the Kuru disease, as that is found primarily in the brain. And the reason behind its transfer is that when cooking, there are frequently bone splinters in the process of tearing apart the skull and the bones, and that allowed brain matter that had Kuru to be absorbed into the body as well as being eaten, as the brain was actually considered the best part of the corpse in the floriculture tribes.
Yes. What made you choose this topic?
Last year, my English language class, we were all given the assignment of doing an individual research project, and I chose cannibalism because I really wanted to see the movie Hannibal. I did not actually see the movie, but I learned a lot about the topic, and that actually led me to medicinal cannibalism, as it was a subsection on the practice that I found during my overall research.
Yeah. So you do see some application of common life. Because you see, we have gone through a business meltdown in this, field. And the most affected was the young undergrads.
Yeah.
So when it came to the discussion in industry, I'm from industry. I was of the view that we need to make our young people to choose to do, especially in education, with applications, and it drives them to sustain themselves.
Yeah.
So that's where do you see any application of with research and
I do. I think that there is definitely research that is actually currently being used, particularly with stem cells, which come from the placenta after birth. And that is actually considered part of the fetus's genetic composition. And and stem cells are being used now to treat other diseases because they do not find genetic material for makeup at that point. And by using the stem cells, you're in effect using corpse medicine because that material came from a separate individual in order to treat a new individual. And that is seen as part of medicinal cannibalism because it is the use of human body matter.
How hard was it to find these sources?
That was the worst part of this entire project because most, if not all of my sources are actually in England. And I do not have the ability to get on a plane and go to England and to actually have access to these materials. So I was really fortunate to find the Wellcome Trust Library since they have digitally archived many of these manuscripts and they are available online to the public. Some of them are not. You need a library card, which I also was unable to get since you need to go to London and go to the physical library. Not something a teenager is able to do because I have no money and no ability to do that as I was still a minor at the time. So very difficult to find the primary sources. The secondary sources were actually much more accessible since they can be found at almost any public university institution, including ASU, which, thanks to the new library policies of most of the universities, they're able to borrow books from other universities, which is fantastic, and I love them so much for that. I was able to get some really great books.
How much guidance did you receive from your external advisor in order to do this type of research?
Little bit. It's not something that's very. It's a process that you have to make up as you go along, I found out. So the best thing that my external advisor was able to do for me was give me the materials I asked for. So I would ask for, can you help me get this book or find this part or find a paper on this topic? And that was what my advisor was really great for because they helped give me all the materials that I needed as soon as I knew what to ask for.
So you focused on Western medicine, right? That was the.
Yes.
Did you ever consider branching out to Eastern medicine?
I actually did, and one of the reasons is that China has the oldest documented practice of medicinal cannibalism. The issue in that is that it is in Chinese. And I do not speak Chinese. So